Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. Somewhat of an emergency edition, special edition, right? The long-awaited House lawsuit settlement was approved Friday evening by Judge Claudia Wilken. And folks who watch and listen to our podcast know we don't like to get too into the legal weeds here, right? But this is such an important deal for college sports that John and I thought we should hop on it. We got a great guest. Sam Ehrlich from Boise State. He's a law professor. He's got a doctorate in sports management from Florida State. He has been on top of it. We're bringing him in to explain everything. What do you want to know?
This is the perfect guest, right? We always strive to get the right guest, the right time. This is the guy. He was on top of this Friday night as it was breaking. I want to know, first of all, how did he know it was coming? He seemingly had a sixth sense to know what was happening, what tipped him off to that. Secondarily, who are the winners? Who are the losers? Where are the holes in this thing, the potential pitfalls? How about you?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've got to make sure we don't get too in the weeds and we keep it at a level where you and I can understand and everyone can understand the real world implications. But let's do a quick, so we don't have to get into it with Sam. Let me do a quick recap.
Okay.
There's basically four pillars people need to understand about this lawsuit settlement. One is that athletes are going to get almost $3 billion in back pay for NIL that they didn't earn. That is going to get paid by the NCAA over 10 years using March Madness money. Pillar number two is the revenue sharing, which has gotten a lot of attention, right? Schools are going to be able to opt into a revenue sharing deal where starting July 1st, they can share up to $20.5 million with their athletes. Basically broken down, football is going to get $15 million, men's basketball $3 million, and then everybody else $2 to $3 million. There is the new NIL component, right? NIL still exists, but they are trying to clean it up so you get paid for legitimate business purposes. Athletes will have to submit NIL deals to a clearinghouse that will then determine if it is a reasonable compensation for the work done. That's third pillar. The fourth is that roster sizes are getting reduced while scholarships are getting increased. So in other words, with football, it used to be you could have 85 on scholarship and then 20 or 30 more walk-ons. Now you're capped at 105. They could all be on scholarship, or you could have 85 on scholarship and 20 walk-ons, but the roster cap is at 105 for football, 15 for men's basketball, 15 for women's basketball. So those are the four pillars: back pay, revenue sharing, NIL enforcement, and the roster reduction. So now we don't have to get into all that with Sam. He can just kind of walk us through the implications.
Well, I as you unpack that, I start thinking about the Olympic sports. I start thinking about all the Olympians that college athletics is the feeder system for the United States Olympic team in a lot of sports. And so as you say, hey, 20.5 million, and this is going to football and men's basketball, there's not a lot left over. So I want to ask Sam how he sort of sees the Olympic sports moving forward. And are we now going to see the United States Olympic Committee have to form Olympic development academies like other countries? You go to China and other countries, these are academies. These are not the university system that is producing all of their great athletes. And so it'll be interesting to see the impact on that.
All right. Well, without further ado, Sam Ehrlich, assistant professor of legal studies at Boise State, and one of the best versed analysts out there in terms of NCAA sports law. Sam, thanks so much for joining us here. Huge news, and you were the first one to publish it on Friday evening. I guess let's just start big picture. What does it mean for folks here who don't follow the details, of the legal details? What does this mean for college athletics?
Yeah, and I think the biggest headline of it, and I think what a lot of people are leading with, is that the revenue sharing era of college sports is here. We now have the ability for schools to enter into direct NIL deals with their college athletes, to be able to pay these college athletes directly, and really do so in a way that, despite what maybe the NCAA would argue, is effectively pay for play. And with that, of course, we now have kind of this kind of quasi salary cap. They're not calling it a salary cap, but we can call it a salary cap. We have kind of anti-circumvention measures to avoid the ability, or at least try to avoid the ability, for boosters and collectives to come in and kind of go past the cap beyond that, and kind of this roster limit part that replaces the scholarship limits and was really kind of the big hang up of the settlement as well.
Yep.
Can you give us an idea, because you were first on this, the backstory of sort of when you saw that it was finalized, how that comes down in your world?
Yeah, so I run a website called sportslitigationtracker.com, and to really effectuate that, to really do that, I subscribe to a service that gives the email notifications of different postings in all these different cases. So for a lot of these cases, the ones where they have some kind of link with the court, I'm able to get these updates pretty much real time. And what's funny is I actually didn't get an email notification about the opinion about the order granting final approval being launched right away. In fact, not until a little bit after I posted it. I'd gotten an email notification from the House case where Judge Wilkin had granted an administrative motion to a few of the athletes that wished to opt out late, and I thought it was really suspicious, really kind of curious, given that she hasn't made any kind of ruling on any of this for a while, aside from kind of extending some deadlines. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to refresh it. I'm going to, eat the cost of refreshing a over 1,000 item docket at this point and see what comes up. And sure enough, I refreshed at the exact right time and ended up getting lucky with it.
Were you expecting that she was going to approve? Because there had been a lot of, back and forth. She wasn't thrilled, clearly, with how the NCAA was handling the roster issue. Did you expect she was going to say yes, or were you thinking this was going to get thrown back?
It's kind of funny, for a while, and really ever since the NCAA and the plaintiffs came out with this designated student athletes kind of compromise to the roster limit provision, which I still don't feel necessarily solved the issues that Judge Wilkin identified. And I think it's something that is really going to rely on a lot of good faith from the schools. I had thought from that point that it was probably about a 50-50 chance, about a coin flip chance, because there's a lot of ways you could read what the plaintiffs and the NCAA's response to Judge Wilkin's very well-founded issues with the roster limits issue as just not enough, and not meeting her not meeting her expectations, or kind of what she needed to hear in order to pass the settlement. But as time went on, I really started to kind of get the more of a feeling that she would grant the settlement, as we were delayed so long for almost a month from getting that kind of the last word on that roster limit issue. I thought Brandon Marcello of CBS Sports, he had published an article talking about the delay a little bit, and he had named some sources within kind of the college sports ecosystem who had said, well, the delay probably means she's going to grant the settlement, because she's spending a lot of time writing as appeal proof an order as she can. And as time went on, as we got more and more time separated where Judge Wilkin really wasn't doing anything, or I guess was writing this opinion, I really did start to agree with that a little bit more, because it was the more reasonable explanation of why there was such a delay.
Can we drill down maybe a little bit on who the winners are as you look at this? Who benefits from this? Is it conferences? Is it schools within conferences? How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, the big winner, I think the big winner to start is just the players, especially, or really particularly in the revenue generating sports of football, men's and women's basketball, because they can now get these direct payments. I think that's the easy, who winners of this, and really what the settlement was designed to benefit. But talking about the schools and looking at kind of the winners and losers, looking at the school's perspective, I do think the Power Four is definitely going to be better suited to benefit from this a lot more, just because they're going to have the resources, they're going to have the wherewithal, especially at the top of kind of the totem pole, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, kind of moving on up. They're going to have the wherewithal, they're going to have the ability to go up to the full cap, and maybe even beyond that, depending on how our new College Sports Commission, how fervently they're going to be enforcing these anti-circumvention measures. But they, and especially with the boosters that they have, especially with the infrastructure that they've already built up to pay the players, even when it was less legal or less allowed, they're going to be able to continue to do that. They're going to be able to go to that $20.5 billion cap and potentially even beyond it as well. And I do think to that end, it does exasperate some of the competitive balance that we've already seen in college football to a large extent. And because I know, for example, Cal, for example, they had published, or they had a beat reporter kind of publish a statement from them saying, well, we're going to be able to share a good amount. And I think what they ended up coming together with was about $7.5 million or something like that, which isn't even close to the $20.5 million. So, we look at a sport like Major League Baseball, for example, where we have the Mets and the Yankees and the Dodgers who are spending, almost or above $300 million in payroll. And we're seeing teams like the Rays and the Athletics who are spending closer to $50 million. And that's something that we're going to be seeing in college sports moving forward for sure.
Do you think because of the over the cap issue with the quote unquote true NIL, the legitimate business opportunities, do you think schools that are in major metropolitan areas will have an advantage on that front versus the schools that are in college towns?
I think you can look at that both ways because, yes, the major metropolitan areas are going to have more potential boosters. They're going to have more potential NIL deals. They're going to have more opportunities. Schools are going to, or businesses are going to be more willing, are going to have more incentive to be able to enter into these deals because it's going to reach a wider market. But at the same time, there is kind of that big fish, small pond scenario where here in Boise, for example, Boise State Athletics is the only game in town. We don't have a true, or at least a major league professional sports team to compete with, where USC, for example, and UCLA, yes, it's a huge area. Los Angeles is a huge metropolitan area. There's a ton of businesses that can enter into these NIL deals with the athletes, but you also have the Dodgers, and you have the Lakers, and you have the Kings, and you have the Ducks, and you have the Clippers, and you have the Angels. You have all these different professional sports teams that already have, that are really going to be competing for a lot of the same dollars and a lot of the same kind of true NIL deals.
Is there a public school, private school advantage that you see within this? Wilner and I received an email from a concerned USC fan who said, hey, our cost of tuition is higher. Does that put us at a disadvantage?
It could, because it just means that they're going to have to be paying out more for scholarships. But that's something that's really kind of existed for a while, and that's something that's really going to continue for this for sure. Especially now that you have the ability to have more scholarships, even beyond kind of the original scholarships that we had, which were fairly limited in a lot of different sports. So potentially it could give an advantage to private schools. I think a bigger issue for that, even beyond kind of the cost of attendance at a lot of these private schools, is the simple fact that you're going to have FOIAs, you're going to have public interest requests, and you're going to have a lot of different kind of probing at this. And the private schools are going to be a lot less susceptible to that than the public schools are.
And so if it's going to continue to if it's going to keep an uneven playing field, so to speak, that we've had forever in college sports, right? I mean, Ohio State has always been on a different field than most schools. How do you see the new Pac-12, whether it's Washington State, Boise State, Fresno State? How do you see the new Pac-12, the Mountain West? How are they going to compete, right? Are they in a bigger hole than they were?
Yeah, that's definitely a question that's near and dear to me, to my heart, being a professor at Boise State and a fan of Boise State athletics. And I know that's something that we're constantly thinking about. I'm not affiliated with the athletic department directly, but I have really good friends in the athletic department. I talk with them fairly frequently, and yeah, there's certainly a concern about that. There's certainly kind of a thought about that. Boise State, and I think we could say the same thing about the rest of the Pac-12. We want to compete at the highest level. We want to be at that level. We want to continue playing Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl and competing with them and putting up a fight for most of that game. And this is definitely going to make that harder to a certain extent. It's going to kind of exacerbate that because Boise State, I don't think I'm going to be making any kind of major headlines. We're not going to be able to pay $20.5 million to our athletes. Like that's, I don't think anyone in the athletic department would get too mad at me for saying that. I think that's pretty well known. We're not going to be able to compete at that level. And I think it's something that we want to be able to compete on the field to that level, certainly. And I think a lot of it's going to depend on whatever, television deal kind of ends up with this. And I think also a lot of it's going to depend on what happens with, looking at college football specifically, but also college basketball, how the playoffs end up panning out and how auto bids end up panning out. I know that's something that we're very concerned with, and I'm very concerned with, even being unaffiliated with the athletic department and just a fan.
Scott Barnes, the AD at Oregon State, I asked him sort of about that $20.5 million and said, okay, these schools in the Pac-12 are not going to be able to get to that level. But he sort of said, well, at least it presents a ceiling that is there that did not previously exist. And at least that's the ceiling. And hey, how close can you get to it? Do you agree with that line of thinking?
It's a hypothetical ceiling, and it's one that I think we're going to I think it'll be really interesting to see how things pan out with that, where it could end up being a very enforceable ceiling, especially if it's something where we get federal legislation to codify the House settlement, which I know a lot of people in the college athletic space want now. And I think this might, now that we have the passage of the House settlement, it might be something that actually spurs federal legislation, which is really kind of stalled in the mud for a very long time. Just to codify it and just kind of to spark that to get going. I'm not sure, but really at the end of the day, it's going to depend on how enforceable that cap is. It's going to depend on how enforceable the House settlement is writ large. Because I imagine I'm fully confident that as soon as we see Deloitte and the College Sports Commission reject the deal, we're going to have a lawsuit. Like there's going to be litigation over this. And Judge Wilkin, in her order, made clear that, hey, if future athletes have an issue with the implementation of the cap, they still have those damages rights. They still have the right to sue for damages. They can't sue for injunctive relief to change it, but they still, the way she read the release, which I wonder if it's news to the NCAA and the College Sports Commission, is to give athletes the ability to sue over implementation of the settlement. And I think it's only a matter of time until we see that.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the vulnerabilities would be one, whether the schools can enforce the revenue sharing cap of 20.5 million, whether the Deloitte run operation NIL Go can determine what fair market value is, or in the words of the College Sports Commission, what a reasonable range, right? Can they determine a reasonable range for an athlete's NIL deal? And the other piece is the Title IX factor, which I assume there's going to be a lawsuit on Title IX grounds, like at 7:59 a.m. on Monday. Where do you walk us through what you see as the biggest vulnerabilities here?
I would say it's that second one. I would say it's the second one on the list. I think enforcing the cap is going to be fairly straightforward because all the schools who've opted into the settlement, they're agreeing to abide by the cap, and they're agreeing to give the College Sports Commission the ability to kind of enforce this. And even if they file a lawsuit over this, over potentially antitrust issues or maybe even state law issues, I do think courts are going to kind of defer to that in large part. There's kind of this isn't always true, but in antitrust law, which is, as we know, kind of the field of law that's really kind of governed these whole conversations, there's kind of a prevailing issue. And again, it's not universally true, but members of a conspiracy, members of a combination can't necessarily sue over that conspiracy or combination. So
okay.
That's something where I imagine if a school tries to file a lawsuit saying, hey, you're restricting my ability to pay players beyond the cap, that's not going to end well for the school. I think it's something where the school is not going to necessarily win that. I mean, we'll see what happens with state law. We'll see how Tennessee's law, for example, is being implemented and how it's being kind of determined. But I think that is kind of a smaller issue because I also think that schools are not going to want to sue over this. I think schools are going to maybe go to that second thing that you said, which is just try to get around it through boosters and collectives and trying to really challenge kind of this reasonable rate of compensation thing, which I think certainly is the weakest link of the settlement. Because for one, the way that Deloitte is going to be handling this, at least from the information we know, is going to be complete black box, and that yields issues. That yields legal issues when you're not being transparent about the way that you're calculating these things, and when you're trying to tamp down the free market just in general. And the free market, as we've seen over the past few years, the free market is that these players are very expensive, and they are owed, a significant amount of money when they are on the free market, which they're on very frequently. So yes, we're going to see, Deloitte really pin it to the actual NIL services, the real NIL services that are being offered. But I think a lot of boosters and a lot of people involved in this are going to have an attitude, and it's hard to argue with this of, who are you to tell me how much I'm able to pay for these services? And that's certainly going to be the key prevailing factor moving forward. And as far as the Title IX issue is concerned, I fully agree. We're going to see a litigation over this almost immediately. If not on Monday morning, but also if not on Monday morning, then probably shortly after July 1st or on July 1st, because we've already had at least the Biden era Department of Education say, yes, we feel that revenue sharing is subject to Title IX and does need to be split evenly between men and women. And that's something we're already seeing a little bit of kind of prodding at, just in terms of NIL support in the Schroeder University of Oregon Title IX case, which survived a motion to dismiss. So that's pretty telling right there. And I definitely think it's a matter of time. Like the lawyers who are on all these Title IX cases, the Arthur Bryant firm, I think they're gearing up for this right away. If not them, then certainly someone else as well.
The Olympic sports, there's already tiering going on, at places like Oregon. You can see that they're starting to make decisions and say, hey, we've got to prioritize football and men's basketball because we get a return there. How do you think this impacts Olympic sports in general?
I think it really hurts Olympic sports. It really does. I don't think there's any way around it. I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat this, because you're really kind of coming at them. There's two different fronts where they're being kind of attacked in this. Where one, just the decreased investment. Athletic departments now have to be a lot more careful with how they're spending money, contrary to popular belief and contrary to really what we've seen over the past several years, or what I think the perception is. Athletic departments do not have unlimited money, or at the very least, if they do have unlimited money, if they have money coming in from boosters, a lot of the times that money coming in is not coming in to fund Olympic sports, and maybe it kind of helps with that. But these boosters a lot of times expect a return on investment, and their return on investment, what they see overwhelmingly, or what they want overwhelmingly, seems to be football and men's basketball. So you're going to have to spend more money into football and men's basketball. You're going to have to spend more money into maybe women's basketball to a lesser extent, especially for certain programs like South Carolina. And that's really going to take away the amount of investment that you're going to be able to give into Olympic sports. And on the other hand, we also have the roster limits, which more than anything else, and really we're seeing a lot, are hurting the Olympic sports a lot more than they're hurting kind of the revenue sports. Basketball wasn't really changed by it. Football still has up to 105 members of the roster, which is still, fairly high. But a lot of these teams, a lot of these Olympic sports teams have been forced to cut athletes, or are going to cut athletes. And the secret here is it kind of feeds into the first issue as well, where the reason why they're cutting these athletes is to save some money, and that's kind of, again, hurting it two different ways.
You think athletic departments are going to downsize, cut maybe middle management positions because every dollar they can find now has to be funneled towards rosters?
I think you're going to see a little bit of that. I definitely do. I think we've already seen a little bit of that. I can't remember, was it Oklahoma that I think announced that they're going to be cutting some members of their athletic department, and I would not imagine that they're going to be the last ones on there. I think we're going to start to see, and it's going to be an issue because the members of athletic departments are already overstuffed. They already have way too many responsibilities in a lot of these more middle management areas, or they already rely far too much on graduate assistants and interns, and we certainly might start seeing more of that moving forward as well.
There's some talk about schools opting out or not opting in to this. Where do you think that line is going to fall?
I think it's going to fall roughly around the G5 FCS split, where there's certainly going to be schools on both sides of that. We've already seen plenty of FCS schools say that they're opting in. Sacramento State, though, they clearly have goals of being an FBS school. They've said that they're opting in, but North Dakota State have said that they're opting out. So you kind of already see where that line is going. And I think it's the schools that are, and I think a lot of schools that are opting out are doing so. One, they're saying, let's see how this plays out for a year. Let's see whether this actually kind of works for a year before we actually take the plunge and opt in. And some of them have even already announced that we're going to be opting in starting 26, 27. But I think a lot of them as well, they're more concerned about roster limits. And for a lot of schools, and this includes a lot of Division I schools, having athletes on the roster that are walk-ons that don't get scholarships that's income coming into the school. That's valuable enrollment dollars coming into the school. And some of these schools need that. And cutting athletes is kind of counterintuitive to that. So I think the schools that really want to compete at kind of the highest levels are going to be opting in because they want to be able to compete on the recruiting markets. But schools that are less focused on that, or schools that are willing to kind of be at that FCS level, to be at the kind of low major level and compete at that level and compete in those conferences, they're going to be just fine opting out.
Sam, before I let you go, I got two more questions here. Sure. How, on a practical level, will the House settlement have an impact on college football in 5 or 10 years? Is this going to push us closer to a super league, to more realignment? Will it create more stability? How do you see it kind of manifesting for fans and their teams?
It's an interesting question. I always struggle a little bit with the 5 or 10 years because I don't think looking back 5 or 10 years, any of us would have ever imagined that we'd be in the place we are today. So yeah. It's always tough to answer because I think the way that college sports is changing, and frankly, the House settlement, it does a lot. I don't think it's a cure-all for anything.
Right.
It certainly changes things, but I think it'll really depend on A, whether the House settlement is enforceable, and B, how people and how schools react to the House settlement. I do think that the upper tier conferences, the Power 4, and maybe just the Power 2, the Big Ten and the SEC, may see this as an excuse to continue to consolidate power and continue to say, we are at a level higher than everyone else. We need to have, have a structure that reflects that. And it could lead to something that's more of a super league. It could lead to something where, the Big Ten, SEC, and maybe the rest of the Power 4 kind of breaks off and does their own thing. That could lead to litigation. I fully imagine that would lead to litigation. So I think it'll be really interesting. And I think we may even see something where the schools that are fully opted in the House settlement, i.e. paying the full $20.5 million, might be treated differently, or there might be incentive for those schools to want to be treated differently than the schools who are not going to be able to fully opt in.
Is there what is the next House case? What if you were going to tell listeners who don't get into the weeds on the NCAA legal stuff, what is the next lawsuit that's either in the pipeline or about to be solved that is going to change everything? Is there something out there that is kind of on the runway here?
I have two answers for you.
Okay.
One is Johnson v. NCAA, Ralph Johnson v. NCAA. And this is a case that I think people have been talking about for a while. It's a case that's been in the pipeline for a while. We even had an appellate court decision already last summer. But that's the case where college athletes, where the plaintiffs are arguing that they're employees of their institution. And if anything, I think House really jumpstarts that. I think it makes it a much easier sell because you have direct compensation, and direct compensation that, even if you're not calling it pay for play, it pretty clearly is pay for play. And that's something where if you look at the various factors of the various employment tests, including the one that the Third Circuit just created for this specific scenario, we're seeing more and more, we're seeing a stronger and stronger argument that college athletes are employees. And, frankly, we even may see a Johnson settlement. We may see a situation where you have kind of some resolution to this, some negotiated resolution of this, where you have a quasi-employment model. You have something where maybe comes through federal legislation where you have, the ability to have employment and have collective bargaining to really stabilize a lot of this, or stabilize a lot of this. That's the actual word. And that's a big one. And I think that's a really important one. It is one where I think a lot of schools are terrified of employment status. And the other one, it's not one lawsuit. It's a group of lawsuits. In fact, it's 20 plus lawsuits right now. It's the lawsuits arguing for additional eligibility. And the ones where all these different athletes are saying, now that we're getting paid, now that we can get paid moving forward, why can't I get an extra year of eligibility to replace my JUCO year where I certainly wasn't able to get paid?
Could you see a day where an athlete has unlimited eligibility? They can play for 7 years, 5 schools, 6 schools in 7 years?
I don't, because all these cases are based on antitrust law, and antitrust law, it's a balancing test. It's all about the balance between anti-competitive harms and pro-competitive rationales. And courts, even the courts that have granted this extra year, even the courts that have sided with the plaintiffs in these cases, that have sided with the players, they've still said that, you know what, there does have to be a line. We're just not sure that this is the line, that not allowing JUCO year, or not allowing JUCO years to count towards Division I, or allowing JUCO years to count towards Division I. That's not the line.
Okay, gotcha.
Sam, one more. Does this, in your mind, open the door for more involvement from Congress and lawmakers? And I know there are a lot of interested parties who don't want to see states and places that don't have Power 2, Power 4 schools suffer. Does this open the door for a little more intervention, or is that a non-factor?
I think it's certainly something that pushes the ball. It's something where, because if I'm a member of Congress and I'm inclined to care about this issue at all, I see the House settlement, I see the resolution of the House settlement of, okay, they've done most of the work. We can now kind of fill in the blanks. It puts the onus much less on Congress to kind of create this whole new system that's going to be, very much attacked and might lead to potential constitutional issues and do all these different things, and would be just very, very difficult to get consensus on. Now I think it's a lot easier to justify just filling in some of these blanks and to kind of codify the House settlement and protect the House settlement as something that the players and the NCAA agree to in arm's length negotiation. Of course, pushing the ball doesn't necessarily mean we're actually going to get there. I think there's a lot of reasons to think that Congress is not going to act because, well, it's Congress. So we'll have to see what happens.
Sam, can't thank you enough here. On a Sunday, busy weekend, obviously, for you. And, great job walking us through in a way that, like, I can understand. No legal background whatsoever. I can understand. And I would say your postings on X, not only for the House settlement, but generally have been invaluable for me and a lot of folks trying to understand this giant transformation that the courts are pushing on college sports. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Of course, it's been my pleasure. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, so feel free to invite me back.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Take care,
All
man.
the best.
Thank you. Jon Wilner, let's unpack this a little bit. Great stuff. Wealth of knowledge, fills in some blanks.
Yep.
I know, Rob Mullins, the Oregon athletic director, they're one of the halves and they're playing in a half conference, but he told me about a week ago that one of the problems he was having is that he says, all right, we don't know the rules and we're waiting and this stuff's supposed to happen July 1 and be implemented on July 1. Well, now they've got the framework and they have the rules.
They do. Everybody had been on pause. Now you can kind of move forward. But I think one of the key things, and Sam touched on this in just enough detail. He was great at not getting too in the weeds. This doesn't solve everything. This is a singular antitrust lawsuit that does not address a bunch of key issues that are still out there. And will it end up holding up in court? We don't know. It's going to get challenged. Key parts of it are going to get challenged. And college sports, the transformation continues, but it is not a linear, transformation. It is, it's in starts. And this is a move forward, but it doesn't solve everything.
And I'm also into, there's some apathy out there from fans. The fans, when you start talking about the House settlement, they tune out. I don't want to hear it. Just tell me when kickoff is. But there's real world implications here, and I'm curious to see, as the schools absorb this and as the fan bases start to see how this impacts football and basketball in particular, and then Olympic sports. I'm curious to see what the fan reaction is to this. Does this alienate more fans? Do people start to tune out? or does this provide that ceiling that at least gives, the Pac-12 fan a chance to go, okay, that's the ceiling. Now we can see how close we can get to it, because before we didn't know where the ceiling was, when you're starting to think about some of these schools.
Yep. I think that it seems like the transfer portal and NIL have leveled the playing field a little bit, but you still look at the schools that are dominating college football, and it's like Sam said, the odds are this is going to continue to have an imbalanced playing field, right? Because the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be much better able to absorb this into their budgets, to fund the third-party NIL. And so if you're in the new Pac-12 or the new Mountain West, it's going to be that much tougher a road forward.
Yeah. I was told very early on, we were all focused on the Pac-12 media rights and the expansion moves that were going on. And, there was a source who was consulted with by the NCAA schools on the House settlement and reached out to me and said, hey, this House case, this is before anybody was writing about it. This House case is going to change college athletics. And here we are. Make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, you hit that subscribe button. You can read me at johncanzano.com. You can read him at Jon Wilner. You can read him at wilnerhotline.com. And we'll be back with an all new episode next week.
Thanks, everybody.